Welcome to worship. I'm Pastor Michelle Andrews, and we are so glad that you have joined us today for online worship. We hope that you'll connect with us and let us know that you were here for worship. There's a couple ways that you can do that. There's a QR code on your screen that will take you to a form to fill out. You can also fill out the Connect card on our website. At both of those places, there's an opportunity, a place for you to tell us if you have specific prayer requests or if there's anything that we can help you with. And we invite you to do that, and we will be back in touch with you. If you are new to worship during the pandemic, we're so glad that you have found us. There's an ebook that we would like to send you. It's free to you. It'll come to you through Amazon. If you'll text NEW to the number that you see on your screen, that'll let us be in touch with you and get that book out to you. We continue to offer opportunities for kids and youth online during the week. Our website has all the information about that you'll need. We also are continuing with our small groups that are meeting virtually, and we have a couple new small groups that are starting in the next several weeks, and we'd love for you to join us. That information is also on our website. One of the core values of this congregation is to serve our community. So many of us in this time are looking for ways to make a difference and to help. And providing part of dinner for Bridge to Home for some of our homeless neighbors is a great way to do that. We're looking for help specifically on June 9th and June 23rd. The QR code that's on your screen will take you to the place where you can sign up for part of that meal. We are so glad that you have joined us today. Welcome to worship.
Hi, I'm Nicole Reilley. I'm the lead and teaching pastor here. And I'd love you to connect with us this morning by taking a photo and posting that with our hashtag Flourish UMCV. and also commenting below. So if you're on our Facebook page, we'd love you just to say hi, or if you're on YouTube, just to connect with us in that way. Today we continue our series on Flourish. This is actually our last week of the Flourish series. And as we're talking this week, we're talking about environmental flourishing. This quote jumped out at me. "Those that plant trees love others besides themselves." I think that's true. When we talk about the environment, we're talking about not only what we do and experience, but then what that means for coming generations. Over these weeks, we've tried to look at with you, what are the simple things all of us can do to flourish a little more? Flourishing is about living into the power of Christ's resurrection. Each week, we've looked at what the Bible has to say about this, and then we've also heard from an expert, someone to help us take our learning to the next level. Stay tuned to the very end today. You'll hear Dr. Christopher Carter, who brings some wonderful resources and ideas to us about environmental flourishing. So welcome to worship. We're glad you're here.
Would you join us now in a time of prayer? Let us pray. Holy and loving God, we come before you with gratitude for all that you do for us, for all that you give to us, and for the love that you show us. You are good, and we need your presence and your care. We are especially aware of those who are suffering right now, for those who are ill, for those who are grieving, for those who are lonely or feeling lost. We are grateful, God, that you call us to come close to you, and that you welcome us just as we are. We continue to pray for those who are affected by COVID-19, for those who have the virus, for those who are treating them, for those who are working to make a difference. We pray for wisdom for right decisions to be made about how and when we can return to normal life. Give us understanding in our frustrations as we wait. We are mindful that Jesus taught that what was important was that we love you and that we love other people. People who are hard to love, people who have hurt our feelings, people who think and believe and act in ways that are different than us. Help us, God, shape us, continue to transform us that we might be more like Jesus and love all people through our words and through our actions. We are grateful for the opportunity to worship. We are grateful for the people in our lives who love us and who we love. We are grateful for the opportunities that you give us to serve and to love others. We pray all of this in the name of your Son. Amen.
The Bible starts with the story of creation. We hear how God created the heavens and the earth, the waters and the land, the day and the night. Then God created plants and animals, and then finally people. When we read the story of creation, we see that our God is a creative God. Our God created all these amazing things. And God invites us into this experience of his creation. I love the story of creation. It's one of my favorite texts in the Bible. And it's appropriate that the Bible begins with that, right? With the start of creation, and that God, in the telling of the story, invites us in. It invites us in to see the wonder, the majesty of the world around us. Today, though, I think we live a little bit far from that glory and majesty of creation. Life is busy, and our minds are usually on very practical things. Few of us grow our own food. We go to the grocery store. Maybe you, like me, have purchased plant after plant after plant, trying to keep alive a house plant. Maybe you also have noticed that with air conditioning and heat and all that we have to keep us comfortable, sometimes we miss the rhythms, the seasons that our natural world has. Not all of us are so disconnected from the earth around us, the world around us, but I think more and more of us are. You know, we live in a time where we're inside most of the time. We live in a time when we're more screen-based. And not that there's anything the matter with that. But have you ever wanted more of a connection to the natural world, more of a connection to the creation around us, more of a connection to that beauty? I know I have. I know I've realized there are times when I'm just inside looking out instead of outside experiencing it all. Today, we finish our series on Flourish, and we've been talking over these weeks about all the different things that we're called to flourish in order to experience the power of the resurrection in our own lives. To flourish is about living a bigger life, a fuller life, and this is what God gives us in Jesus. And today, we finish up by talking about the environment and talking about environmental flourishing. Over these weeks, we've talked about our mental health, our emotional flourishing, our physical lives, our spiritual growth, and even our connections with each other socially in this time in which we live. Today, we finish things up, and we're going to talk about what it means to flourish environmentally. We're going to talk about our connection to the environment. My hope over these last 6 weeks is that there's been a couple areas that have resonated with you and that you've felt, yeah, I could do that. I could move into that. I could flourish just a little bit more in that area. So today, what we'll do is we'll start with our text, the story of creation. Craig will read for us Genesis 1, verses 1 through 12.
In the beginning, when God created the heavens and the earth was a formless void, and darkness covered the face of the deep, while a wind from God swept over the face of the waters. Then God said, "Let there be light." And there was light. And God saw that the light was good, and God separated the light from the darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And there was evening, and there was morning, the first day. And God said, "Let there be a dome in the midst of the waters, and let it separate the waters from the waters." So God made the dome and separated the waters that were under the dome from the waters that were above the dome. And it was so. God called the dome sky, and there was evening and there was morning, the second day. And God said, "Let the waters under the sky be gathered together into one place, and let the dry land appear." And it was so. God called the dry land earth, and the waters that were gathered together he called seas. And God saw that it was good. Then God said, "Let the earth put forth vegetation, plants yielding seed, and fruit trees of every kind on earth that bear fruit with a seed in it." And it was so. The earth brought forth vegetation, plants yielding seed of every kind, the trees of every kind bearing fruit with a seed in it. And God saw that it was good. This the word of God for us, the people of God. Thanks be to God.
So this part of the text is really just the first 3 days of the creation story. There's more, but it is a bit long, and I wanted you to hear this piece because it would give you a sense of the story and a sense of the rhythm, how the story is told. The one thing you might not pick up from not hearing the whole 7 days of creation is this refrain that happens fairly consistently. It starts off with God created, and then the refrain says, "And God saw that it was good." This is where we start when we talk about creation, that it's good. It is God's good creation. It's a good creation that's a gift to all of us. Today, as we talk about flourishing environmentally, I want to talk about a couple things. I want to talk about the Christian connection with the natural world. I want to talk about why the environment should matter to people of faith. I want to look at what nature actually gives to us and why it matters so much. And then, of course, we'll end up with a couple ideas on some next steps. So let's start at the beginning and talk about how Christians, historically speaking, have seen the natural world. It probably comes as no surprise to you that Christians do not think all uniformly, all the same about the environment. They don't today, and historically they haven't either. In fact, there's been kind of a tension in Christianity around the natural world and its place and importance. And that probably has to do with the fact that Christianity tends to focus on human beings. It doesn't focus as much on the whole of the natural world. And sometimes that's been a stumbling block to us. Today, we live in a time where people feel a variety of ways about the environment and the Christian call to care for it. And that tension has been seen actually throughout all of Christian history. One of my favorite times in Christian history is medieval times. And that was a time where nature was very important to people of faith. In fact, you got to know God through nature. So the study of nature, the study of animals, the study of the world was key. And it was a way that people entered into their faith, entered into the knowledge of God more. Probably the most famous theologian from that time would be someone you may be familiar with, St. Francis of Assisi. Francis taught that God created the animals, that God created the environment, that God created all that God created, not just so we might consume it, but because it was valuable in and of itself. That stance toward the environment, though, wasn't a stance that continued. And in fact, by the time we got to the Renaissance, there was a rise of more of a focus on science and reason and a distancing from nature. Nature became less important to the Christian faith. It became something that was not really a key piece of the faith anymore. And in fact, that way of thinking continued for quite a while. Those who study these things say it really wasn't until the 1960s that Christianity once again started talking about the environment. In the 1960s, we started looking at things like what was happening to the environment, issues around climate change and pollution. And people of faith, like secular people, all came together to look at these issues and talk about them. The United Methodist Church has a particular tradition around the environment. We are a United Methodist Church, which is a mainline congregation. And in the United Methodist Church, our founder, John Wesley, he was the founder of what became the United Methodist Church. He had a great fascination with the natural world. In fact, he wrote a 5-volume series on it called A Survey of the Wisdom of God in Creation. Let me read you just one little quote. By thus acquainting and familiarizing ourselves with the works of nature, we become, as it were, a member of her family. But while we remain ignorant, we are like strangers and sojourners in a foreign land, unknowing and unknown. John Wesley was very involved in the issues of his time. And in fact, the United Methodist movement, well, then it was the Methodist movement, was such that it was involved in making the natural world a safer and better place. United Methodists are credited with the substantial decline in the death rate in England from the 1700s, all the way from 1700 to 1801, because the Methodists were very involved in basic things like dealing with open sewers, impure water, unplanned cities, and smoke-filled air in Britain. So the Methodist movement was involved in the natural world, caring for it and helping people live in harmony with it. If you come from a United Methodist background or you are newer to the faith, this is part of our tradition that we've been involved in these things. In fact, this week in the e-blast, I sent out a whole bunch of links that you might explore more of our tradition as United Methodists being involved in creation care and the environment. One of the links that I provided in the e-blast is a link to a movie called A Better World. This is about the Vetter family farm, and Molly Vetter is one of the clergy in our annual conference. So this is her family's family farm. It's really interesting to see how a small family farm exists and exists in the context of their faith. So, first thing is that creation is good and that it's God's creation, it's a gift. Second thing is that as Methodists, we stand in this long line of people who've cared about the environment, who've been involved in making the world a better place. The third thing I want to touch on is probably a little more personal. It's about how do I interact with the natural world? I think there's usually two ways that we choose from. One is we make the choice to be kind of an owner. We see all the things around us, the garden, the animals, the dog, nature, water, as ours to own, to be masters of, to control. The other is that we see all these things from the lens of being a steward. To be a steward means that we care for creation. It means that we are aware it's not what we own, that it's God's, and that we work to keep the creation in the way that God would want us to keep it. To be a steward is to understand that it's not just about using it in a way that works for me and mine, but that there's something bigger. I think of the idea of being a steward as something that kind of, lifts up our chin and causes us to look at a bigger view, causes us to see things more from the perspective of God, from the perspective of others from this perspective of generations. Throughout our series, we have talked about how we are not parts, right? We have maybe a spiritual flourishing and emotional flourishing and mental flourishing, but those aren't divisions within us, that these things are all unified, that they all are one. And so our mental health affects our physical health and our spiritual health. All those things come together. When we talk about this last kind of flourishing, it kind of raises that up even more. And it reminds us that it's not just we're one, but that communities, people are not to be divided, that we're to see the family of God that we all belong to, and that creation care is about seeing how close we are to each other and how much it matters what global warming does, not just here in Valencia, but what it's doing all around the world. It's about our connection, not just to ourselves and to our own kin, but to the world, to all of God's creation. If we are stewards, it means that we care beyond ourselves, that we use things in a way that's honoring of God, and that we're aware that our choices have consequences. When I was growing up, before we moved to California when I was like in 5th grade. When I was growing up, we lived in Ohio. And we lived in a part of Ohio that was really very green and very lush. And I remember that my parents would take us to this forest that was not too far from our house. And that a usual activity was for usually my dad, took me and my brothers, and we would spend an afternoon walking in the forest. I still remember that. I remember picking up rocks, and I remember the ferns and the moist soil. I remember the light coming through the trees. I think when we're children, we often have more of a connection to nature, don't we? I mean, maybe you have a story like I have that story of times that you spent in nature, especially when you were young. But I think sometimes as we grow up, as we get busy, as we move indoors for work, that we don't really connect in the same way to nature. Yet, our connection to nature matters throughout our life. I listened to a podcast where they review different books and kind of talk about how you might live that book out. And one of the books was a book about nature, and so it made me curious about what nature really does for us, how being a person who spends time outside, how it increases our flourishing. One of the studies I came across was a large study that was done in colleges. It was done, I think, 10,000 college students. They looked at how much stress college students have. We all know about that. And they looked at what it was that actually helped college students deal with their stress. And what they found was the prescription of just 10 minutes a day in nature made a substantial difference in stress. Didn't matter if you were out taking a walk. It didn't matter where in nature you were. Didn't matter if you were just sitting on a bench looking around. That had a profound effect on your mental health, on your mental flourishing, on your emotional health, how you felt about yourself and your life. I also saw, and I keep seeing this study, so I probably should read it all someday. The University of Minnesota did a long study about how nature itself has healing powers, how being in nature soothes us, it restores us, especially in times when we are going through difficult and hard times. And then there was this great article on kids and gardening. Kids are closer to nature, but a lot of times they don't participate in gardening. But when they do, when a child gets to learn some basic things about gardening, they not only learn about plants, but they find that children actually grow in their self-confidence. They become more curious. They grow in their coordination, their patience, their teamwork ability, and they also become healthier eaters. A couple weeks ago, a friend of mine posted on Facebook an article that he found curious, and it was an article how those who raise their own vegetables are happier. And he wanted to know if it was true. And I said, from my perspective, yeah. I love to garden. I don't have a lot of time for it, but I do grow my own lettuce and spinach when it's in season, and it does make me happier. It makes me happier to be able to do that. The environment matters. Connecting to nature has benefits for us. It makes us stronger and happier and wiser. It makes us more connected to our own flourishing as we receive from the bounty of God's creation. Let's expand this a little bit. We're talking about flourishing environmentally, and that's mostly, so far we've talked about environmental care, and we've talked about creation care and the importance of all of this. But let's expand a little bit and include our environment to be really where we live, where we work, what we do, how our spaces are, and how that affects us. So look around you this morning and look at your space. How does it make you feel? Now, hopefully not frustrated with maybe, dirty dishes and all this stuff going on, but try to overlook that. Your space in general. How does it affect you? We are finding that where we live and where we work and where we play and where we shop, that all those things have an effect on us. They have an effect on how we feel. A recent article in Forbes magazine said stuff we all know but always need to be reminded of, that we're actually happier and we're more productive if we're working in a place that has natural light. If we're working in a place that has green, actual plants. We know people are sick less often if where they work they have a view out the window, if they can see nature and trees, that's inviting and helpful to them. We also know that kids have a healthier BMI if they are able to get to a park or live by a park, that affects them. Where they live and how they travel affects their health. We flourish in our environments not only when we care for them, but when we let them care for us as well. We should design all of our spaces, not just to get more done, right? But to really be in a space that feeds us and helps us grow and helps us connect to other people, and that helps us be in a way that helps us flourish. When we talk about environmental flourishing, yes, it's about the natural world. It's about animals, but it's also about even more than that. It's about how we live. It's about what food production is like. It's also about personal and work space in our lives. So as we talked about this, and we talked about a ton of stuff this morning, let's talk about a next step, something that would help you flourish in this area. And there's lots of choices here, and if you stay till the end today, you'll hear Dr. Christopher Carter, and he has some wonderful things to say to us about this, but a couple other ideas too. One next step might be to look at how you're living and how you are impacting the environment in your choices. A couple big ways I see people looking at this right now is with plastic, right? We got in, I think, a really bad place where we were all buying plastic bottles of water. How do we reuse? How do we do that differently? Another thing you hear people talking about right now is food waste. I think because we're not going to grocery stores, we're maybe a little more aware even of how we used to waste food and how we're called to do something different. So one thing you might do is look at how you might live in a more environmentally friendly way. Second thing I invite you to consider, and this might be the one you do, is to develop a stronger connection to nature. You know, I talked about the study that was done with the college students and 10 minutes a day and the difference it made. I don't think you have to be a college student for that to work. I think any of us who take 10 minutes and go outside find that it helps. So that might be something you test out this week to see if that helps you flourish a little more. And then the third thing I want to invite you to do is to think about if this is the year you do grow a vegetable garden or you do go get a plant and learn how to care for it. I saw this meme the other day that I loved, and it says, you know, how do people feel power? Is it money that gives people power? Is it status that gives people power? And the meme says, no, it's bringing a plant back from death that gives you power. I have a plant right now at my house that I am not giving up on. Now, oftentimes I have to give up on them. They just do not survive. I've got a couple of those. I got one in my office right now that's not going to survive. But this little plant, I am working on it. Instead of just throwing it away, I'm looking at it, trying to figure out how to be helpful, how to be a little more invested in the natural world with it. Each day, I do a series of morning prayers. And when I say this part of the prayer, it reminds me of the creation. It says, this is part of Psalm 95. The sea is yours, and you made it. The dry lands your hands fashioned. Let us bow down and worship. Let us kneel before the one who made us. For you are our God, and we are the flock that you shepherd. And we will know your power and presence this day, if we will, but listen for your voice. I think we hear God's voice in nature. I think it is one of the ways that we connect with the mysteriousness, the grandeur that is our God. So may you listen for what God is saying in nature. May you lean in to that power and love that is there, that is all around us, especially in spring. And may it help you flourish. We're going to end this part of the service with a video prayer. And this is a prayer that Pastor Michelle wrote, and Janelle Brosnan has been the filmmaker who put this together for us. So enjoy and enter into this visual prayer.
bright, blessed day, the dark, sacred night, and I think to myself, what a wonderful world.
The colors of the rainbow,
So pretty
in the sky, are also on the faces of people going by. I see friends shaking hands, saying, how do you do? They're really saying, I love you. I hear babies cry, I watch them grow. They'll learn much more than I'll ever know. And I think to myself, what a wonderful world. I hear babies cry, I watch them grow. They'll learn much more than I'll ever know. And I think to myself, what a wonderful world. Yes, I think to myself, what a wonderful
Today, Reverend Nicole has reminded us that part of what God has given to us is creation. It's all around us. It's everywhere we go. It's what we see and smell and enjoy, even in this time. We are so grateful for all that God has given to us. And we are grateful for your continued faithful stewardship. If you would like to give today, there are several ways to do that. There's a QR code on your screen. You can go to our website. Thank you for continuing to help us be the church in this time.
Today we're very excited that Dr. Christopher Carter could join us. Dr. Carter is a PhD from the Claremont School of Theology, where his PhD is in religion, ethics, and society. He teaches, and he has a research focus in philosophy and theological ethics, Black and womanist theological ethics, environmental ethics, animals, and religion. He's the assistant professor of theology and religious studies at University of San Diego. He is also the assistant pastor at the Pacific Beach United Methodist Church. I think you'll enjoy Dr. Carter. He has some wonderful things and insight to share with us today.
I want to begin by saying environmental flourishing, on one hand, I think takes seriously the role and place of human beings within the environment. Often when we think of environment, we think of nature, we think of human beings outside of nature. Like we think of ourselves as something distinct from nature. But within our tradition, Christian tradition, even within biblical text, we see, this epic poem describing how we all came to exist in this same moment, right? That human beings are animals just like other animals. And there's this order on one creation story. And then the second one, we have this other space where you talk about intimacy and relationships with the earth, that we come from the earth. And so when we think about environmental flourishing, I would say in large part, we're talking about human flourishing. Like these two things they're deeply interconnected, right? And so why it's important right now, I think what we can see as a consequence of the pandemic is what happens when human beings take a step back, right? When we take a step back and actually aren't flying as much and aren't going on as many vacations and overcrowding certain places. And if you look, or if you are reading anything now about what's happening with the environment, you see like cities are seeing animals come out at night that they haven't seen in generations because people aren't there. They're talking about in Venice how you actually can begin to see through the water and how fish are returning to the canals. The way our atmosphere is changing, like you can see so clearly the disproportionate impact we're having on the environment as human beings. And so on one hand, the pandemic, I think, gives us an opportunity to take a step back and witness, okay, this is what things would be like if we had a more balanced and holistic relationship with non-human nature, where we actually can hear the birds. We have to stay home, maybe in our neighborhood, so we're walking more, right? And we're seeing things we had never even noticed before. I see more I've been living in my house for 2 years. There's people that I've met that I'm like, I've never seen you before, because people are actually outside. And so I think to a certain degree, environmental flourishing in this moment, we see how important our environments are, right? Just to our ability to be alive and to flourish in this particular moment we have to stay home. Well, I think there's a couple things I want to name, and like one is, I guess maybe two are really specific, and one is much more about how we view ourselves internally. One, I think, is we have to develop a sense of accountability, right? As Christians, as people of faith, to recognize the role we have within our environment. And there's a lot of language people use right now to describe our current relationship with the non-human world, like the Anthropocene and things of that nature. And really what that describes is this space where people, where human beings have disproportionate impact on the environment. And the challenge I think we have as Christians is to recognize that's probably not going to change. What can change is what that impact is and how it looks, and does it have to be a harmful impact? How can we try to live in a way that's more sustainable and be more accountable, right? Into the role that we have and how we live our lives. Unfortunately, I think what we're seeing right now is we're in an era of no accountability. Our leadership, whether it be on a federal level or government level, you see people saying, I have total authority, but I don't take any responsibility. That's a problem. And so being accountable and recognizing the harm that we've done as human beings, I think, is a very important step. So that's kind of an inward move. The next thing I would say, now I do and think about the environment from the perspective of food. I'm a food studies person. My grandfather was a farmer, so that's kind of in my bones. And so one thing I think we totally can do is to begin, and many people probably are doing this already, but to begin cooking and to return to the kitchen as a space of where we find ourselves and tell our family stories, and not seeing it as a chore, but to actually look at the food we're preparing and serving as, to a certain degree, telling our own story and sharing a bit about ourselves. And the food that we buy from cooking is kind of like this third step. Is that where we can begin to address some of these concerns? So that means, for me, trying to buy things more that are local. So I try to do most of my shopping at a co-op, not even necessarily a farmer's market. Farmer's markets are okay, but co-ops are spaces where that dollar is going straight to the farmer. It's going straight to the farm, closer to the farm worker, because farmers and farm workers are vastly underpaid and under-resourced and highly, highly stressed, economically stressed. and they're really feeling it right now because of the pandemic. And so I think we have a responsibility to those people who grow our food, who we need, right, to make sure that as best we can, we're spending our dollars, that we're using our resources to actually go right to them, and to try to avoid as much of that dollar getting sucked into the kind of middle corporations. Because that ultimately is the way our food system is more or less structured, right? We prefer to go to a Ralph's or a Vons to get our groceries rather than going to, a co-op. Like I go to the People's Market in Ocean Beach in San Diego, and it does cost a little more. It does, right? So if you can afford to do that, I think we should do that. But the reason it costs more is that money actually goes to the farmer and the farm worker to be able to make a sustainable living wage. I think the other thing, I guess the last thing I want to leave you guys with really is to, as you are thinking about and maybe taking the next actionable step of beginning to cook and buy your produce in ways that is more sustainable and allows for the flourishing of a broader community. If you have children, to really try to include them and to try to share those stories with your kids, with your grandkids, about what this meal means and where it comes from and how it represents part of you. One of the things I love to eat is red beans and rice. Now I am a vegan, and so that means that what I eat is different than what my grandparents ate. But the coolest thing is when I've been able to make this for my grandfather, we're able to talk about how it's different than the one he used to make and how he still thinks it tastes really good. And the stories about my grandmother who's passed away several years ago and what she would do to it. And it creates a story. It's a time for us to really reconnect. And so I think the difficult time of the quarantine is that we're all spending all this much time together with those people that we love, and the blessing of the quarantine is we're spending all this time with the people we love. And so my hope is that being able to reframe cooking as a way for us to kind of reconnect can alleviate some of the stresses that come along that I think we're all experiencing right now, given the quarantine that we're in.
I hope that this series has helped you take some steps. They might be small, they might be big, but whatever they are, they move you toward the power of the resurrection, toward flourishing that much more in your life. Faith is certainly a journey, right? It's not something we ever get to the end of on this side of eternity. And it's something that takes our willingness to go, to journey, to try, to experiment. So I hope this series has been helpful to you. I'd love to hear how it's been helpful. One of the things that is odd about all of this is that this series was preached entirely to an empty congregation. So let us know how this touched you and spoke to you, so we have more of a sense on what would be helpful in this time. So go this day to love and to serve the Lord and one another. Go from this time and be Christ Church. Amen.